The day I found out my husband had stolen my father's inheritance while celebrating his affair in Bali, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply sat in my empty kitchen, staring at the bank statement that had arrived in the mail, and felt something cold settle into my bones. $3.7 million. Gone. Transferred to Marcus Wright, the man who had promised to love and protect me just 18 months earlier. But what Marcus didn't know was that my father had taught me chess when I was 7 years old. And the first rule of chess, he always said, was to never reveal your strategy until checkmate. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone you trusted most, you're not alone. Subscribe to hear more stories of justice served cold, because sometimes the best revenge is simply the truth. My father, William Chen, wasn't just wealthy, he was methodical. As a retired federal judge, he understood the importance of documentation, of legal precision, of trust. When he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2022, he spent months carefully structuring his estate, not because he didn't trust me, but because he wanted to protect me from exactly what ended up happening. Claire, he told me during one of our last conversations in the hospital, I'm putting the inheritance in a joint account with you and your husband, but there's something you need to know about the conditions. I should have paid more attention to that conversation. I should have asked more questions, but I was grieving, planning a wedding, and trusting a man who held my hand during every chemo session, who promised he'd love me through anything. Marcus Wright was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, successful in his consulting business, attentive in all the right ways. He proposed 3 months after Dad's funeral, during what he called our healing process. I thought it was romantic. I thought he understood my grief. We married in a small ceremony in October 2023. Simple, intimate, just close friends and family. Marcus suggested we use the inheritance money for our future. Maybe buy a house, start a family, build something together. It made sense. It felt like honoring Dad's memory. What I didn't realize was that Marcus had been studying my father's estate documents like a blueprint for theft. The first sign something was wrong came in January 2024, just 3 months after our wedding. I wanted to access the account to pay for some home renovations. Nothing major, just updating the kitchen Dad had always complained about. When I logged into the bank portal, I couldn't access the funds. Technical glitch, Marcus assured me, kissing my forehead the way he always did when he wanted to end a conversation. I'll call the bank tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Every time I brought it up, Marcus had another excuse, another delay, another reason why we should wait. The bank was updating their systems. There were tax implications to consider. We should talk to a financial advisor first. Meanwhile, Marcus's consulting business seemed to be thriving. New clients, expensive dinners, a sudden interest in luxury travel. When he suggested a second honeymoon to Indonesia in February, I was suspicious but hopeful. Maybe this trip would help us reconnect. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Just the two of us, he said, booking the flights on his laptop while I watched. A chance to really start our marriage right. I packed my bags, still believing in us. I wasn't supposed to find out the way I did. Marcus had covered his tracks carefully, methodically, with the kind of attention to detail that probably made him good at his job. But he made one mistake. He underestimated my grief-driven insomnia. The night before we were supposed to leave for Bali, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into his home office around 2 a.m., looking for the melatonin he kept in his desk drawer. That's when I saw his laptop, still open, still logged into his email. The subject line stopped me cold. Bali itinerary, Marcus and Sophia. Sophia, not Claire. Sophia Reeves, his business partner who had been increasingly present in our lives since the wedding. The woman who called during dinner, who needed Marcus for emergency client meetings, who somehow always required his immediate attention. I clicked the email with shaking hands. Resort reservations for 2, couples massage bookings, romantic dinner confirmations, all scheduled for the exact dates of BALI, our supposed second honeymoon. But the real knife in my heart came in the next email thread. bank confirmations, transfer authorizations, legal documents with forged signatures. My father's inheritance, every single penny, had been moved into Marcus's personal account 3 days earlier. While I was planning what I thought was our romantic getaway, he was stealing my future and preparing to celebrate with another woman. The paperwork was meticulous. He'd forged my signature on transfer documents, claiming I'd agreed to consolidate our assets for tax efficiency. He'd used his power of attorney, something I'd granted him for simple bill paying, to authorize transactions I'd never approved. $3.7 million. My father's life work, my security, my future children's college funds, gone. And tomorrow, he was going to leave me at the airport while he flew to paradise with his mistress. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't pack my own bags or change the locks or do any of the dramatic things you see in movies. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and planned. My father hadn't just been a judge, he'd been a prosecutor before that. He'd taught me that the best cases weren't built on emotion, but on evidence. And Marcus, in his arrogance, had left me plenty of evidence. I spent the remaining hours before dawn carefully photographing every document on his laptop, every email, every bank confirmation. I forwarded key messages to a private email account he didn't know about. I documented everything with timestamps and context notes. Then I called his office and left a voicemail as his loving wife. "Hi, honey. I know you have that early client meeting tomorrow, so I'll just meet you at the airport. Can't wait for our trip." But I wasn't going to the airport. I was going to visit some old friends of my father's. Judge Patricia Williams had worked with my father for 15 years. She listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that reminded me why I'd always felt safe in her presence. By noon, she'd connected me with both a criminal attorney and a forensic accountant. By evening, we'd filed preliminary reports with both the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the State Attorney General's office. While Marcus was probably boarding his plane to Bali, believing he'd successfully stolen my inheritance and my trust, federal investigators were already freezing his accounts. Marcus returned from his week in paradise to find his world systematically dismantled. His bank accounts, frozen pending investigation. His business accounts, also frozen. His passport, confiscated. His freedom, dependent on a bail hearing scheduled for the following Monday. I was waiting in our living room when he walked through the door, still tanned from his romantic getaway, probably expecting to find me devastated and confused about why he'd never showed up at the airport. Instead, he found me calm, composed, and surrounded by legal documents. "Hello, Marcus," I said quietly. "How was Bali?" The color drained from his face so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Claire, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything," I interrupted. "The forensic accountants have already done that." Quite thoroughly, actually. I handed him a folder containing copies of everything. His forged signatures, his unauthorized transfers, his email correspondence with Sophia, his flight confirmations, even photos they'd posted on social media from their romantic couples massage. "The interesting thing about federal financial crimes," I continued, "is that they take them very seriously, especially when they involve forged documents, identity theft, and wire fraud across state lines." Marcus sank into the chair across from me, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. "My father taught me to play chess when I was young," I said. "He always told me that the most important move wasn't the obvious one. It was the one your opponent never saw coming." The legal proceedings moved faster than I'd expected. Marcus's case was straightforward. Clear evidence of forgery, unauthorized access, and wire fraud. His defense attorney tried to argue that we were married, that community property laws should apply. But my father's estate documents were airtight. The inheritance had been specifically designated as separate property, with clear conditions that Marcus had violated. Within 6 weeks, every penny was returned to a new account in my name only. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay additional damages for emotional distress and legal fees. Sophia, it turned out, had no idea about the stolen money. She genuinely believed Marcus was a successful consultant who could afford luxury vacations. When she learned the truth, she actually called to apologize and to provide additional evidence for the prosecution. But the real victory wasn't financial or legal. It was the moment I realized I didn't need Marcus's validation, his presence, or his love to be whole. Sitting in my father's favorite chair 6 months later, I found a letter he'd left me in his desk drawer, one I'd been too grief-stricken to discover earlier. His handwriting was shaky from the chemotherapy, but his message was clear. Claire, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong with the inheritance arrangements. I structured everything to protect you, but I also taught you to protect yourself. Trust your instincts, trust your intelligence, and remember that the people who truly love you will never ask you to compromise your security for their comfort. He'd known. Somehow, even while dying, my father had sensed something about Marcus that I'd missed. The legal protections he'd built into the estate weren't just about taxes or probate. They were about ensuring that if anyone tried to steal from his daughter, they'd face the full weight of the law. Marcus had seen my grief as an opportunity. He'd seen my trust as weakness. He'd seen my father's death as his chance to cash in. But what he'd actually found was a trap built by a man who'd spent 30 years putting criminals exactly where they belonged. I kept the house, our house, though it never really felt like ours. I renovated that kitchen Dad always complained about, using money that was rightfully mine, earned by a man who'd spent his life serving justice. I kept my father's chess set too. Sometimes in the evenings, I set up the pieces and play through the games he taught me as a child. I think about strategy, about patience, about the importance of thinking 3 moves ahead. I think about Marcus sometimes, though not with anger anymore. Mostly I feel sorry for him. He gambled everything on a scheme that was doomed from the start, destroyed his career and his freedom for money that was never really his to take. He lost more than he ever could have gained. And me? I learned that the strongest foundation isn't built on trust alone, but on self-respect, careful judgment, and the wisdom to distinguish between love and manipulation. My father's inheritance was never really about the money. It was about his faith in my ability to recognize my own worth, to demand better treatment, and to never settle for less than I deserve. That lesson, it turns out, was worth more than $3.7 million, though I'm certainly glad I got that back too. Some battles are won not with words or tears, but with patience, evidence, and the quiet confidence that justice, when properly served, needs no announcement. It simply arrives, inevitable as checkmate.